So I kind of was waving my hand at like, how did that I said, oh, I also provoked a misunderstanding, or and I was thinking, what did I really mean there? So I thought I would say, because I figured out basically. So basically, I had this video, it seemed to me clear. I'm saying these two things are alike. And I thought when you were questioning, when you said that Twitter was the internet is in the comments, I thought you were saying, therefore, it's different than a restaurant, that that they were somehow different. And now I'm realizing, oh, you never actually said that, and you thought that I was saying it's okay for Twitter to decide who's politically acceptable. I don't think Twitter should decide that. I'm not a big fan of Twitter. I don't really want Twitter to decide anything that has the kind of cultural impact that Twitter has at this point, really. I think the people using Twitter should impact that. I mean, if tweets are going to be reported on the news, I'd rather citizens have a free speech right to that medium. Okay. And you were thinking the opposite. And when you argued with me, I was thinking you were saying Twitter's different, but you aren't really saying that. I don't know what you're saying on exactly what we should do with the law. But I don't, and I actually don't know what you say about restaurants. Do you have to force them to let everybody in, or can the free market decide? I realize you haven't actually said anything about that, so it was a misapprehension on my part to think that what you were saying was it doesn't apply to Twitter. It applies, that these things apply differently. So I don't know if you agree with me that there's a similarities in those three cases, and by looking at the differences that exist between them, we can maybe sort out how we want to, you and me, address this concept of private infrastructure that's part of the commons. What does that really mean? What are the requirements on a company like Twitter or a restaurant or a baker? How does the free will and choice of those businesses play a role? And in my idea that needs more work is that, it's basically businesses choose. Do they want the protection of being a carrier, or do they want to, micromanage the content of their customers, right? So, so at the moment, we agree about the internet should be considered a commons. In your latest video, you had mentioned maybe it's debatable what's going on with that, given that the law doesn't really protect that like it should. There is some protection of that because there's a momentum of people thinking that, but I worked in industry, and that's not how the businesses think. YouTube lets everybody do it because they want eyeballs. Eyeballs, that means money for them. And then later, once they're controlling the whole fucking video throughput practically, especially in vlogging space, though not literally, of course, ever. Um, those it's they don't, they have other concerns besides just as many eyeballs as possible, and I think they are. And it looks like right now there's going to be a turn to control this stuff, and it'll affect everybody on the wings of the bell curve. In other words, the smart and interesting people. So I'm not for that. So I think we agree on that. What I don't know is, what do you think should be the law? I mean, we can't do something retroactively to Twitter, but what would Twitter have to do if the law was in place? I think, and I want you to answer that, but I don't think you have to, or you don't even have to have an answer. But if you don't know an answer, you kind of implied that I'm not saying where the law should go. Maybe you're acknowledging it's complex. I would love it if you just overtly acknowledge your feelings on that. I'm not that clear either, but I do have the seed of an idea that I like with this carrier law. And so, though there's details about how that law would work, the basics for me is that, well, Twitter would either be liable for the fact that ISIS is using their platform as conspirators, or they probably want to sign up if you're going to be a mass carrier of other people's information as a carrier, and then they wouldn't be liable for that. They would still have to turn off channels based on court orders, be it because of copyright, criminal conspiracy, just a random law passed by Congress for good or bad. Court orders they would have to answer. and laws like the DMCA, could still exist. And it doesn't mean illegal stuff is allowed to stay on their network, but it's kind of like the phone company. If somebody had a phone that you number and you could call up and you're listening illegally to a bootleg copies of Pink Floyd The Wall, and the police found out about it, they tell the phone company take that down, and they would have to. So it'd be like that. The carriers just aren't personally responsible for like monitoring every phone call and checking to see. It's not their responsibility. So I think this is something businesses could choose, and that we'd have most people choosing carrier status because they're starting as startups, and who wants the liability? And then they could not block people. There is a block feature at Twitter. People that don't want to hear Milo could already block him. Am I wrong? I don't use Twitter, but am I wrong? So they could already block him. So a carrier could, when they have this multi-party, party line kind of thing going on, it's not exactly like a phone. So you're exposed to people you don't want to hear. Individuals should be able to go block, block, block. So they could create a block feature, but for them to kick somebody off of their system on their own free choice, not because there was a court order, um, they would have to choose to be responsible for all of their other content. Making that decision to block a certain kind of content would make them responsible for the other content. That's why the DMCA, as bad as it is overall as a law, and especially some of the other factors of it, and it's been abused in YouTube. At least it has this kind of a carrier thing where YouTube doesn't have to go and do this stuff, but they have to respect when copyright holders do it. Now, of course, you also have the thing that YouTube is also doing it on their own. That's another issue. Anyway, all right, we're not really talking about the copyright. We're talking more about political positions and philosophical positions and objectionable opinions. All right. I hope this may. I hope this isn't more confusion or the complexity of how many points. I try to make counterpoints. So a lot of times it seems like you call me a liar because I'm saying, well, here's a good point, and here's a good point that contradicts it. Yeah, because I believe that's possible. And the way we make go forward is we get all those points and we compare between them and find out, oh, this is the point that can give. This is the point that was not well founded, and improve our ideas. And in the case of this, actually create a construct. I mean, there's always been this idea of carriers. We create a 21st century version of that understanding that could become law and precedent.